Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's been a busy week this week. It seems like it's been flying by for me. This is already the week after the Microsoft Fabric conference. A lot of announcements are starting to trickle out now. It's kind of funny to me going to the conference and coming back here, and I was thinking, like, where's all the announcements? They announced a ton of things, and there's like no blog post to support these announcements. So thankfully, I started taking a lot of video of little demo features that they were producing on my phone, because then I can present I've been slowly kind of trickling out a couple messages here on Twitter. I did a lot on Twitter initially, and then now I'm also putting some stuff out on YouTube and LinkedIn from videos that I caught while I was at the sessions. So anyways, it was just interesting to me that we still haven't got the blogs yet for all the announcements. So looking forward to seeing some of these blogs come out and unpack them. Today, we're going to jump into a crazy article, very thorough. Kurt writes little mini essays every single time he blogs. So we're going from Data Goblins today. Kurt Buehler wrote out a great article called Myths, Magic, and CoPilot in Power BI. So very interested to unpack this. We've talked a lot about AI, generation, CoPilot, and where does it fit inside the Power BI ecosystem? So it'll be interesting to see where we land on this today. All right, let's go through a couple announcements here. Tommy, what did you find for us?
Man, we got a ton. So we'll put it in the chat, but there's finally a blog article on my Fabric going through a recap of all of the announcements at the community conference in Europe.
So
we've already talked. Yeah.
This is an announcement for the recap of only the Data Factory announcements, because there's actually a lot of Data Factory ones. I'll put that in the chat window here right now. Go ahead, Tommy. What do you highlight in there?
Well, more CoPilot, fast copy for Dataflow Gen 2. We have data gateway support for data pipelines. And we finally have incremental refresh for Dataflow Gen 2. So it's actually now built in rather than trying to hack it. So those are kind of the main updates. Yeah, so they had more than just the Data Factory that they talked about at the conference, right?
Sure. Yeah, they did. There is a lot more than just Data Factory. This is just the announcements that came out just from Data Factory. One of the ones I think I'm most excited about here is I think there's a Spark job environmental parameters for data pipelines. This is actually, I think, a major move on Microsoft's point. It's a feature that should have been built when it came out, but I'm happy that it's here now. The idea is you can add a parameter for a Spark notebook, a tag, a session tag, and that session tag, I think, will carry all the way through all the notebooks you tag that session tag with. So if you have 7, 8, 9 notebooks, it doesn't kill a session and start one every single time you run a new notebook. You can tag the session, and the session will stay on and alive through multiple notebook session runs in a pipeline. It's just an efficiency thing. It makes sense. It also allows you to have different tags for engines in the future. So anyways, that was really cool. I really like that feature. It allows you to spin up a single Spark cluster and use it across multiple notebooks, which I thought was a great idea. There's a lot of CoPilot things coming out. I have yet to play with more of the CoPilot in Dataflow's Gen 2, see how that works. There's an announcement of incremental refresh for Dataflow Gen 2. Have you played with that at all, Tommy?
I've tried hacking it. There's a few articles came out about how you do it in a Dataflow Gen 2. So now that it's actually available, there are a few data flows that I could go back on. It's just, this is one of the odd ones that it's available now.
Why is it odd that it's available now? I don't understand your comment.
Because it's been available in Gen 1 forever.
Oh, yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, and it's even worse than you say, because you don't get the ability to write your data in the incremental refresh to the lakehouse. It only goes to SQL Server. And I think, in my opinion, that's a big miss. If you're going to do incremental refresh, it's got to work with the lakehouse. And it only works from SQL endpoints to SQL endpoints. So I'm not really thrilled about this incremental refresh. I don't really think this is going to be... I think it's useful for people who are doing things in SQL, but I'm not thrilled that it doesn't work with my lakehouse. That's really what I want incremental refresh to do. And there's no equivalent of like drop and replace. It doesn't... My opinion is this works nothing like Dataflow's Gen 1 did. Dataflow's Gen 1 did a totally different pattern of how they did incremental refreshing. This one requires you to have a modified date. you're going to get data that comes in from a source system that doesn't have a modified date, or you're going to need to drop and replace things based on a number of days in date ranges. This system, this new one in my mind, it totally misses the mark. It's not incremental refresh. It's something much less powerful than an actual incremental refresh. So I'm not really thrilled about this new feature. I've played with it a little bit. It's just okay for me. Anyways, other announcements. Anything else that stood out to you on the items there?
Not too much on the recap, but I think it's a good segue with CoPilot and all the announcements, and we're even talking about it today. Another major announcement came out. There is a billing update coming to CoPilot in Fabric.
Seth, you caught something interesting about this post. This post came out at a very timely moment, especially when we're talking about this article with Kurt Bueller as well. What did you observe and find here, Seth?
I mean, it may have been a month after Kurt's article, right?
Could have been.
I mean,
it's about a month.
Hey, listen, if in some way, shape, or form, the people heavily using Microsoft products and have platforms and are just helping others use those, platforms, can make recommendations or outline things like Kurt does in his article at length. And one of the things that struck me was, the testing he's done that we'll get into, was 3% of his F64 capacity, and outlines that, it costs €200 to put together a blog. Whether or not that has anything to do with this, I don't know, but it is something that, as we walk through the article, we'll have to highlight as well, which is, that billing update coming up in November 5th to kind of, what it seems like, reduce the price of CoPilot in Fabric by about 50%. And it sounds like also making it a little bit more discoverable as far as like the costs or the thing consuming the costs of the capacity, which, if anybody has listened to this podcast at all, that is costs are near and dear to my heart as far as like understanding the what, where, who, why of Azure billing. And it has to be done, in organizations I think are demanding it more.
I didn't catch in the article, maybe you guys did, they didn't mention anything about the SKU, that there's no change in SKU. This is still F64, correct?
Yes, correct. There's no. It's still a threshold. A minimum threshold of getting to an F64 to even use it. I'm looking at it now. I mean, there's no physical reason why they would or would not allow you to have it on an F64. But I think what I'm seeing. Okay, I'm reading the tea leaves now a little bit here. This is a bit speculative, but like if you think about how much consumption a CU uses, I mean, it's using a graphics processor unit. Those things are expensive. It's not cheap to do this stuff. Two observations about this change in pricing. One is they were probably using a CoPilot model that was more expensive just to run in general, just because that's what happens with CoPilot. So that's what happens with large language models. Tommy knows a lot more about this than I do, but the ones that are built initially are slow, and it takes a long time to run, and it's expensive to run those initial ones. As you build better Copilots, the technology has been improving. They've been able to build things more efficiently. So they were probably using an earlier model, and they were able to update their model with newer ones trained with more efficiency, which is great, because this means as Copilot gets better, as Microsoft continues developing it, it will get cheaper, hopefully over time. When I hear your comment, Seth, about Kurt kind of pointing out the costs of this thing, there's no way you'd want to put a Copilot on an F2 and be like, oh, wow, I used 75% of my capacity running a couple queries. Like, the reason you don't do that on below an F64 is because it would look too bad on consumption compared to everything else that's in there. So that's why you don't do it. So maybe as they make it more efficient, it comes down to the lower SKUs. Maybe, I don't know, but there's no reason why I can't just run Copilot on any SKU. It just, to me, it seems like a marketing ploy here a little bit. Like, you can only run it at this level because it's less impactful on your percent of your capacity. Anyways, just something I thought was interesting.
I want to say it makes sense, but it just doesn't make sense, because if you get Copilot for Office, again, a big part of what makes our lending model run is text, a lot of text. And that's what everyone talks about, the tokens.
Yep.
And if I'm just using Copilot to ask questions and generate code, which is available in GitHub for pittance, if I can do that over a workspace, unless CoPilot has to, in Fabric, go through an entire semantic model and go through all the rows.
I think this is where we're finding the problem here. It's right. How much data does it actually need to consume to do something? Right?
But if I just have a question for, hey, I want a column that's now 3 days 3 days ago, shift the dates. I don't know.
I don't know how much information they're sending back to it. It's all about the prompting. Right? If the prompting is really expensive, I mean, if you're sending all this data to the AI to figure things out, it's not summarizing well enough. Like that's a lot of text that you're sending potentially to the AI to figure things out. So that's going to be an expensive query. Yeah, agree. Yeah. Anyways, I think there's something.
Regardless,
someone made some strategic decisions there. I think.
Regardless, price down. Yay! Go get it.
I agree.
50% off starting November.
Go to your tenant settings and turn it on now.
Yeah,
that's a good move. Regardless,
new update to the article we'll talk about coming soon.
This is a true statement. All right. Another thing that just came out that's interesting. I don't know how this is going to be received by the community. I haven't really talked to anyone about this one, so I'd be curious your ideas around this one. A new feature for tagging items. So there is now ability to tag your items inside a workspace. So think about tagging preview is on. You can make different tags such as, FY26 or bronze, silver, gold. You can add tags to various elements. What are your thoughts on this one? Do you guys think this is going to be valuable?
I mean, it feels like this is I think there's something like this in Purview. And also, this is also kind of bringing in some of the features, or at least the behavior of Azure when you have to tag or resource groups. I think they've realized too, there's so many objects, even in a single workspace, even if you have folders. I've learned my lesson. I'm not going to call it a game changer, but I think it's absolutely something that's going to be part of your center of excellence. That
so you would use it. You would say this is worth your time to use it.
If I'm the data czar, I'm absolutely working right now on a nomenclature and a standard around this.
Okay. Of course, Tommy would govern the snot out of it and not let anyone do anything fun.
It is admin empowered, right? It's one of those things. I think it was in the chat that somebody threw down the data mesh book link, I think, that I've started reading or / listening to on Audible because I have no time anymore. And a lot of the principles of that are not are right doing essentially what Microsoft's doing with Fabric, right? You're creating domains of areas where individual parts are separated out, and the subject matter experts are engaged and own the data, right?
Mm-hmm.
But part of that is more interesting in Fabric that I think we've all been excited about is just the self-service ability of that, and introducing now all of these users into an ecosystem of data and reporting, right? And as part of that, I think tags are going to be extremely useful and beneficial in that end user interaction with this whole new ecosystem, because if they're trying to leverage or find information about something that's in this workspace or this domain, like tags are a great way to do that. Like, hey, where do I find the data set for this, or how is this tagged? And then, whether it's a table, whether it's a report, whatever, I think it's extremely useful that you can guide other people to utilize the information that you've curated if you're in charge of that particular area. So I think it's a great feature add.
So the part that I really like about this is from domain. So there's a couple things that can now do filtering. We're starting to see like things show up that allow filters to be applied in the One Lake Data Hub, which I think is incredibly powerful because I have a lot of stuff in my tenant and I'm looking at a lot of things. Tagging things will allow you to filter the One Lake Data Hub based on those items, which I think that'll be pretty cool. You'll be able to see the tag that's there, look for it, and then have the tag appear. My question really is, who can make tags? Can anyone make tags, or is this like a specified admin someone generates the tags and then everyone can use them. Is that how I'm reading this article? I haven't really delved into the feature that deep yet.
Your admin overlords control the creation of tags.
Good. That would make Tommy happy.
I thought, well, they control enabling them.
And I think that's where you actually create them too.
Really?
So,
you can, but others can apply tags.
You can apply tags.
Got it. Okay.
Anyone can apply tags, but the creation of tags happens.
Well, I mean, that to some degree makes a lot of sense because you wouldn't want thousands of tags, right?
Right. Because then it's like, what's the point then?
Like you would give this task to Tommy, and Tommy would create the list of the very small list or the hierarchy, of things that can be used to appropriately tag things. Because this would be something that you would share with a much wider audience eventually, right? In saying like, hey, when you're going through and getting access to these particular, areas of information or looking for something, here's the tags that we would, be useful in searching.
I'm also going to throw out something here. And one of the things that super impressed me over the conference was the ability to have semantic link labs do automated things for you. And so as I'm unpacking this a little bit here, I'm thinking about tagging. I think tagging is going to be incredibly important for those of us who are going to be doing some level of automation across your organization, right? Call a list of all workspaces.
Yeah.
For each workspace, call a list of all items. Add a tag to every item in that workspace for the things that I want to tag things for, or something along those lines. So I think there's going to be, from a heavy automation standpoint with semantic link labs, it's so easy to do stuff and talk to the Power BI APIs now. I really hope that I can see some blogs, Kurt Bueller, Andrew in the chat. I wonder if there be any blogs out there that might be able to help us automate some of this. Kurt has also recently put out an article around semantic link labs and how useful it is. So again, I haven't really unpacked that blog yet. So Kurt, keep up the good work. You're doing a great job on all the blog items. I love what you're doing. It's so encouraging. So looking forward to learning from you. But maybe a quick topic there for you, Kurt, if you can't sleep for a weekend and have some other things to noodle out here, maybe a blog around using tags with semantic link labs would be really, really helpful here.
I feel there's an episode for domains, tags, and workspaces and how they're all play along.
I think you're right, Tom, because it's getting more getting more evolved as we go. It was like we had little control with domains, and now it's getting bigger with tags, and so now we have more of this surface area of like what's the best way to. There's going to be the community is going to need to figure out patterns here that make it easy for people to discover content. This is good. These are all good things.
Yeah.
It just gives us more options. Awesome.
More options are always good.
Maybe.
And besides, I think as a precursor, or if we're moving into the article, like this, this just isn't a blog. This almost reads like a pamphlet,
like a white paper. Yes, it totally does. It's a white paper.
It is extensive. Yes. Kurt has outdone Kurt in this one.
All right. Well, I think this is a good transition then. So we talked a little bit about CoPilot, talked about some new features coming out. I think that should be good. There is one other announcement that Tommy was thinking about, was the announcement around announcing a service principal support for Fabric APIs. Let's just skim over that. Let's just say more support is coming. I'll put the article in the chat window just in case people want to read it. But I'm a developer. I do a lot of API things. This is very impactful for me and extremely helpful in the Fabric API realm. But most normal people probably aren't going to be doing the level of development that I'm doing, so probably not as impactful for them. All right, main article. Tommy, give us a summary of the article. Let's jump in. What should we talk about today?
Oh my, what should we talk about? So again, to Seth's point, this is a comprehensive guide manual to using CoPilot in Microsoft Fabric. And what Kurt's done is really gone through the overview of all the different Copilots that are available. It talks about the reality of adoption, things where it falls short, both from the ability of the user to just the service itself, looking at it in Power BI, and overall just taking a look at all the areas that you could use CoPilot, Microsoft Fabric, and Power BI, where you should proceed with caution, where you should understand what you're doing or what it's actually doing in the back end, and where strengths are. So it's an incredible guide that it's amazing. It's amazing that Kurt did this. And I love both the article, and he also has made a PDF version because apparently people didn't like the goblins on it. So he's made a PDF.
People, get over yourself.
Exactly.
I mean, come on.
So under the executive summary, there's a summary PDF version without goblins, which is pretty official and pretty awesome.
And this, to your point right there, that reads a lot like it reads like a white paper now at that point, right? There's just so many thoughts in here. So I like the executive summary in the beginning, Kurt. They're doing a great job on this. There's a lot in the article. We could definitely dive deeper in a lot of these sections, but I really liked your initial overview of the main key points around what's at the top. CoPilot. What is it? How do you start using it? And one thing I will really note here, a lot of companies are struggling with this whole, is it secure? Anything. And ChatGPT, OpenAI, all the things that are kind of being built out there, Cursor, when you send these AI things your information, you're sending a text prompt, a script, something that potentially could be very company secure. Microsoft has taken a very big stance on that's for you and you alone, and it's not going to be used to be training the model more on things. So that's kind of interesting to me. I think that's a good stance that Microsoft is taking, so that businesses can feel comfortable using CoPilot without having their data leaked out, especially if you're writing code in code editors, because that potentially could be company secrets and proprietary information that's inside that code that you're getting help on. So I think that's really important to focus on that part.
So before we get started, I kind of there's a prevailing so two points I want to make. The first is, Kurt does a good job outlining this, right? This is point in time, right? We all know or would assume that CoPilot in its versions of how it's implemented will gain in the value that it provides to businesses. But this is a very thorough walkthrough of the different features that are in the CoPilot fabric and whether or not it works to what works to the hype, I think is a good thing, because a good way to describe it. And the second, actually at 3, second, it's very detailed, and I would encourage every listener to go read this article. So we'll paste it obviously in the chats, but for sure it's a worthwhile read. And third, having what a prevailing theme is going to be like in this, mistakes are possible, right? So the whole article starts like title is "Welcome to CoPilot, Mistakes Are Possible," and I'm just noticing, and I don't know if it's intentional or not, but this is by far the longest article written by Kurt, and he starts with ... Let's have a brief blunt chat, and I'm like, I don't know if that was a play because we're talking about mistakes are possible, or if not, but I found it extremely humorous.
I think the humor. I think your humor and Kurt's humor align very well together.
I could just be reading into something intentionally. I found it funny.
So the article kind of starts off with just a little bit of like, here's the enthusiasm around CoPilot, ChatGPT, large language models. It's just kind of everywhere. And I would agree. This also, the beginning part of this article really resonates to me. Marco Russo came out with a little YouTube short. I don't know if anyone saw it, but there was a YouTube short that Marco Russo put out that said, don't lean into all the hype all the time. People still need to be involved with their data and figuring things out. We've been through this hype cycle before. Something new comes out, everyone gets excited about it, and there's this. It's the hype cycle that comes out of what's the company that does the hype cycle? Tommy, you know this one, right?
That's Gartner.
Gartner does the hype cycle. So it's this really wave of enthusiasm, like this is going to solve all our problems. Everyone loves it. And then there's this big trough of disillusionment, like, well, it doesn't really do what I want. It's not as useful as I thought. And I think we're kind of still ramping up that excitement level. And maybe there's some more community members trying to really tamp down that excitement and say, look, what's really at stake here? How can we best utilize this? Where's the best places to apply CoPilot in your workflows?
Yeah. So I think the 3 main points of the article, and the reason I also encourage people to go read it, I doubt we're going to be, we are not going to be able to give it justice in
no way
25-30 minute conversation.
Yeah.
But the 3 main points that I will probably dive into are the ones he walks through, right? Using CoPilot to generate code, using CoPilot to ask questions about data, right? Because that's a big one. If we're using AI, we're using a search thing, and I can ask any question I want and get the answer, right? That is an expectation. using CoPilot to generate reports, and he walks in detail around those. Should we dive into those, or do you guys want to hit something else first?
I'm going to dive into those. Let's go those.
That's perfect.
Get us off, Seth. Which one you want to start talking about first?
I mean, let's start at the top, man.
I like it. Start at the top.
Using CoPilot to generate code.
This is by far what I think CoPilot is best at doing, in my opinion. Now, it's not great at, albeit not great at DAX all the time, but have you used CoPilot to generate SQL code?
I have had success with code generators helping me generate code, and
yes,
and they seem to be getting better and better.
Yes, I think DAX is more of a nuanced code because there's not as much examples out there around DAX. If you think about like all the language of, rank all the languages of code over time, right? Python's like number one, or Python and JavaScript, maybe like number one, number two, something like that. They're very high on the list. So when you're training things, there's a lot of examples of like functions and how things work and the syntax, and there's a lot of good examples of that. I think DAX would fall very far down this list because it's not as used, it's only used in models. It's kind of a Microsoft specific thing. It's not really universal everywhere. Now, SQL, I would agree, is a very common language. Now, there's a lot of different flavors: ANSI SQL, T SQL. Seth's got probably another 4 or 5 SQLs under his hat somewhere, just laying around. But it's in general, SQL is fairly common language as well, and it's kind of across multiple. There's different flavors of SQL. Like Oracle has its own flavor a little bit versus Microsoft's version, but in general, the language is very diverse. There's a lot of it out there. So that's anytime you see things like that, I think it's going to be very helpful for code generation.
So it's interesting here with this scenario. And if you actually look at the intro that Kurt does on CoPilot versus ChatGPT, because I think a lot of people would start there. How is CoPilot different from ChatGPT? How does it work? And one of the big things as we get into the generating code is this generative AI is considered what's called soft accuracy. So it's, or not
soft
even
accuracy.
Soft accuracy. So
I've never heard that term before. That's the first time I've kind of hearing this one. It just sounds like a way of saying it makes mistakes, and this is a technical way of saying it's kind of accurate.
Well, when you asked ChatGPT for a bunch of jokes or a poem or a rap,
yes,
right?
Yes,
is that necessarily right? And or if you ask for even some code, well, that's pretty basic. When we're dealing with a model, especially if I need for finance this to always be this. In the LLM world, that's considered hard accuracy, which means it must be very precise.
Yes.
The definition of correct.
I like how we're making up new terms for being right and being semi-right. This is just
when we're going large language models.
But this has been, I think we've talked about this in the past. This is my point, right? Certain things can be a little bit more, it doesn't have to be 100%. Like if I'm generating a background image for a thumbnail for my YouTube channel, like it has to be appealing and look good. There's some liberty in like, how many fingers does the person have on the image, right? Does the colors all kind of blend together in a weird way? Like there's some things you can give it some liberty. If there's text on images, does the text actually say a real word, or is it just kind of some gibberish? But I get the gist of like, I'm close enough. It makes sense. I can depict what's happening in the picture. But to your point, Tommy, if I'm asking how many dollars of sales did I sell last quarter, it has a definitive answer. You can't get that one wrong. You can't be like, maybe it was $1 million. I don't know, give or take $500,000. Like you got to be right.
Yeah,
that's funny.
So as we dive into this, the generating code, he's using the DAX query view and using CoPilot, and he's going through the scenario of a user who's simply wanting to get the two dates in hours. They want to compute the difference between 2 date time fields and hours. And he's going through a scenario of different prompts they may use. And he's talking about real world scenarios. This is very interesting to me when I read this initially for CoPilot compared to other tools, because we've talked about other tools, and I had my article about utilizing ChatGPT to create DAX. I have a post online about using Cruiser and basically giving it a markdown document of what my model looks like to generate DAX.
Sure.
To give it the context of my semantic model before actually giving a prompt. And one of the things that Kurt says right in the freaking first part of the generating code in the example is people are lazy and not trained to be prompt engineers.
I don't like the word lazy there. I mean, this is new.
Yeah.
Like I haven't. I mean, the amount of time. How much of your life, Tommy, have you spent Googling things?
Sure, a ton.
Tens of years. Like, I don't know how old you are, but like,
tens of years.
Like, right? I don't know. I mean, we've been trained. The computers have reprogrammed our minds, so we know what to search for to get the results we want out of the Google.
I would still argue that is not true.
Oh, what do you mean?
I think lazy is a strong word. It is.
I agree.
But at the same time, why countless times people have said, I can't find any information on this, and I will go to the Google search engines and I will find things that they are not finding, because there are specific ways I've learned over time that you can find the results that you're looking for where others cannot. So I think even in prompting, or the search type that you put in is indicative of the prompts that you learn or would have to learn to leverage and use AI. So there is a bit of a learning curve. Are you taking it upon yourself to understand that you can't just willingly throw something into a chatbot and expect that you're going to get the same results versus a better prompt? Those are two different things.
Yes. And there's a technique to this that, again, to your point, Tommy, like this is all, I mean, I don't think it's lazy. I think it's just a matter of, we don't know how to work with it yet. We haven't figured out, it's not common knowledge on how to build this stuff. Also, what I'm finding is I've learned from other people, for Tommy, like Tommy was saying this, I've learned a lot from Tommy on how to do prompting. I've also learned that when you make prompts, sometimes it's helpful to document your code using CoPilot and then ask the prompt of what you want it to do. So first, make the CoPilot explain each step with a comment. Then after it's explained it, then take another step and write another prompt to do that. When you're complete, if you get the answer that you want, this is a trick that I've learned from Microsoft people that were teaching this in a class. They said, once you have the answer that you like or result, ask the AI, what prompt should I use to get this answer? And it will try to recreate your prompt. So if you have multiple steps of prompting, it'll then consolidate it down to one prompt. My challenge here is, now I have a huge blurb of text that I need to use repeatedly. Where do I put it? Where do I keep it? Do I open up a loop document and put all my prompts in one spot and then I just copy paste my prompts in? I've seen other people in the AI data space where they're just collecting prompts in notebooks or someplace. There's got to be a place where I can like fast track my prompts into the AI so I can get them. But it doesn't feel like there's something there yet. Like I need like a notebook of prompting things.
So I don't. Here's my personal thought, and then let me know what you guys think. I think we should talk about like the areas, a brief description of what Kurt goes through.
Yeah. Sorry,
detailed, and then
going too deep.
And then, at the end, just like what his results were.
Sure.
What his findings were, and whether or not we agree with him.
Yeah.
Right? So
Agree.
in this section, right, he runs through, I think, two different scenarios of like, I'm an end user, I'm writing some DAX code, and the results are not perfect, right? The CoPilot generates some code. It can successfully do that. Goes through some iterations, and I think his findings are, if we're comparing what CoPilot is supposed to be doing for us, or the story, right? What we're being sold, or what we're like, the hype cycle is, it's gonna streamline and make your job a lot easier, a lot faster.
Yes.
In Power BI and in self-service, we also know we're not dealing with DAX experts, right? So if you're using CoPilot to generate something, his findings are such that it actually, he thinks there could be a possibility that it's creating more confusion rather than people finding the right answer, right? A lot of the times, if you've ever been a part of a community, and Power BI community I was on all the time for many years, was people will bring their specific scenario as a question, and not the code question, right? It's not how do I do something, it's I don't know what to run, or I need to do this stuff with my business, and what they're looking for is the formula or the function that they don't know. And what we're introducing here at least in the outputs that Kurt was able to generate, is an answer, but it's not the functional right answer. It's not pulling the right things together. And is that more confusing for an end user? And now it opens the door of like, are they actually going to spend more time on this? Because they're not going to a place where it's like, here's the function. Now you have to figure out how to plug that in. Hey, it's not working. You don't have a relationship in your model, right? Like the fundamental, like just checks and balances. I can't get it to work. Yeah. Now I'm throwing something that like should be working, but it's not, but I don't understand why it's not. And that is kind of like the morass of what I read in terms of just the testing he did. Is it could create these scenarios where individuals are like, yeah, I got my answer, and then nothing comes out, but then they're thrown into troubleshooting in DAX that they don't understand in the first place. So it's a conundrum, right?
Yeah, and yes, I agree. It's I feel like the story around CoPilot is very broad. We say CoPilot, and even I think what you're maybe pointing out is well set down here later on. It says, what does Microsoft CoPilot look like in just Fabric? What does the Fabric flavor of CoPilot even look like? So, data factory, data engineering, where does it show up in data warehousing and things? So looking at the different elements, figuring out which one of the items are here. Also, you get different experiences, and they kind of do different things based on where you're at in the program. So you kind of have to spend some time learning and figuring out what does it do in order to get answers out of it in different experiences.
Yeah, this goes back to, I'm actually disappointed with the scenario that Kurt put here, because his scenarios that he goes through, the walkthrough of what a user would do, what he had to do in this basic example to get the right output or a better formula based on changing his prompt and giving a little context. I was hoping that CoPilot would have that, in a sense, trained as part of it. Like, oh, I'm a CoPilot for semantic models. So one of my goals, like one of my tasks or skills is the ability to have the context of the semantic model. A lot of the issues that he had with generating code was the CoPilot didn't know that there was no relationship between these two, or that that the DAX statements or the DAX parameters of what's allowed.
Sure,
that's disappointing, because I can feed ChatGPT or Cruiser a document from the DAX documentation site.
Sure,
and again, even without feeding the model, so the leg up, or in a sense, what CoPilot and Fabric should have that no other AI tool should have, it doesn't, in terms of that skill for semantic model context and DAX context.
So if I had to kind of reinterpret what you're saying, is because Microsoft owns CoPilot and Microsoft also owns the semantic model, you're expecting that the CoPilot from Microsoft have more contextually aware elements of the relationships in the model, how the tables are being written, all the other relative DAX measures that might be similar or being used to help build something. So you would expect those elements to be a feeder for your
100%.
CoPilot. Yeah, that makes sense. And it does. I think, again, we're in early days of this stuff, so I'm guessing the answer is yes, it's coming. They've got to figure out how to make it more efficient. Let me ask a dumb question here potentially. Is there a note on CoPilot for Microsoft that tells you what information from the model is sent to the CoPilot in order to give you the prompts? Do they have an article about that?
About what they send?
They don't need an article. They just have mistakes are possible.
Okay. And then that's kind of
kidding.
like
I'm kidding.
Oh, okay. But I think to your point though, Seth, I think that's kind of right? I mean, that's the point here. The point is they're still trying to figure out what are the right level of information to send to the code. Because if you have a big model, you're going to send potentially a lot of extra text to the CoPilot, eat up your prompt characters, and then now you're just spending money to spend money. Like it doesn't.
But scenario one, I don't need to know the values. I just need to know the BIM or the metadata, right?
Yeah, but you have
to generate code.
Understand, but these things get big. Like, so if you're going to send in a BIM every single time, you might be sending thousands of characters of stuff to the model. Like, so you want to send the CoPilot the least amount of information you need to to keep the cost down because it has to they charge you based on how many characters or prompts. I mean, that's kind of how they charge you, right?
Yeah.
So the longer your text string is that you send to the Copilot, the more it's going to cost you to produce the output. So it's a game in my mind. It's a game of optimization. How much do I send to the Copilot so it knows enough about my model before I actually get it back? And just recently, Copilot is just being able to be conversational, right, Tommy?
Mhm.
What is it? What is it called when you have multiple prompts and they're threaded together and it's supposed to understand the context of the prior prompts?
Chat? That's just context.
I thought there was another word for that was like lineage or the idea that some Copilots are just dumb and they just ask a question, it gives you an answer, but it doesn't acknowledge the prior steps.
I see. So that's just basically if you have one thread, it's like system memory.
That's not the word I'm looking for, but
yeah,
it's the idea that conversational chat is not always supported in all Copilots, right? Or hasn't been, and only recently has it been started to be more supported in Copilot. So, for example, if you went to the DAX Studio Code or the DAX Query, chain of thought, it's something like that. So, thanks, Kurt. It's the chain of thought things, right? It needs to understand the prior conversation pieces and use those as context for new conversation you're having with it. I think that's been more of a recent add as well. So that way it has context of what it already has talked about and is using that as information for the next step.
I think one of the things that Kurt does outline somewhere in the article is one that this conversation drives into too. If there's an expectation that you're just going to turn on Copilot and automatically give value, that's not a valid assumption. And I think
I'd agree.
What is outlined in many of these tools, and even where a lot of the Microsoft driven articles and things are, is like you still have to intentionally build things in the ecosystem or set like the baseline for these tools to really gain value for others. And so it's not just going to turn on and work. And I think why you see such a discrepancy between, Tommy, the tools you're talking about, which are open to everyone and open to consume what everybody puts in them, is they're learning a lot more, a lot faster, right? I do agree that it is, I guess, somewhat where the varnish gets rubbed off for me, or the shine immediately goes away. Where with Copilot, I would assume it would be better in some of these areas around models, right? Like, or that the messaging coming back in the DAX editor specifies like, yeah, here's an equation, but here's some problems you have, right? Or and be specific around the areas of what Microsoft owns in that arena of like, what, hey, I've got this model, here's the thing, I want you to do this, and be the community. Well, you don't have this, we can't use that. Like, if we're going to create this, do you want to do it with this first and that second, or make recommendations as opposed to here's the answer, right? And I don't think we're at here's the answer yet. And I guess that leads into like the second part, which is, to me, I agree with Kurt. It's the most concerning, just from this marketing of AI being the answer, or you can type something in and get the answer, is using Copilot to answer data questions. And what he dives into is obviously the amount of work that business intelligence professionals and data people spend. We know data, we know the complexity of all of compiling the business logic, and regardless of what architecture you're putting in, you're trying to produce value for the business. And Tommy, how many times have you even argued about like, well, this sales total could mean 3 different things depending on who you're talking to. Like, that seems like the least of the problems as it relates to, can somebody just walk in and start asking questions against a model and get the answer, right? And I think that's where he rightfully points out mistakes are possible as a little field is not acceptable. It shouldn't be acceptable. And honestly, like, can we? I push to the point of, can you really put something in there that's going to get people in trouble? And that one would.
So, and you're naturally going to this second scenario here, where I'm not going to lie, the scenario 2, which is very much, rather than trying to generate code, we're talking about using Copilot to answer data questions, and that's just simply going through the like a chat, and that would have memory. So it's not using natural language, and I have the chat, and it's like, hey, I want to see the month to date sales for August 2021. Pretty simple. So this is a business user, I imagine, scenario. Going through this scenario, I got goosebumps. I got chills from how scary this could be in an organization. If you go through what Kurt did in terms of how his step by step, he asked a basic question. It would return first an error. Then he asked it a slightly different, and it was the different wrong number, but it didn't say it was the wrong number. So that's, and to your point, Seth, that's scary. Some of the adjustments that he had to make in order to get it right were twofold. He had to really go through the semantic model and make adjustments, hiding and showing columns, really making the model fabric, in a sense, prepped, and really the prompt engineering, which
Right.
is
And what are you doing? You're adding synonyms, you're adding like
it's just
all of the language stuff that we had to do to get Q&A to work correctly.
Mhm.
That's what he had to do to get this to work correctly.
It just, and the weird things where it was showing the year after, not the year that he wanted. And again, you can try to set walls, the distance schema. You can hide and show columns, but we all know this too. There are, unless your model is data governance certified, where we have all of our metrics and the names of those metrics, everywhere, and the data culture is high, a normal user's not going to
I'll have
walk in here.
And to be fair, I'm going to go back and look at the Copilot documentation for this feature specifically, right? To see if there are, hey, don't use this unless you do all these things, because in my mind, if we have to do all those things in order to use it or make it produce accurate results, then that's a prerequisite for use in my company, right?
Yes.
Like I don't want people to use this, or nor should they think they're getting value, like the value they expect or the answers they expect, unless you're hitting my AI approved model or something like
Yeah.
that. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying?
I'm gonna transition just slightly conversation here. I think this maybe relates to what you guys are talking about here as well. Halfway down the page, maybe a little bit more than halfway, there's this really interesting diagram. And again, one of the things that Kurt does really, really well that I absolutely love is he takes concepts and ideas and materializes them down into really rich diagrams. So the images resonate with me. And there's I guess it's called a Venn diagram. It's
Yeah, I knew you were going to
known.
land on this one.
Oh man, it's good. It's known knowns, known unknowns, unknown unknowns, and just total BS. Like you don't know what's going on. Like it's just it's junk, right? And I really liked, one, the diagram was interesting, but two, I had to really take a second to look at how does a novice or beginner learn things, and how do those bubbles of influence change with Copilot? How does this change over time? And I like this. So the one diagram is interesting about the bubble diagram, or the overlap of ideas, things that you know versus things you don't know. But then going down to his other chart where it talks about the novice, the intermediate, and the expert. And so I look at this going and saying, okay, Seth, you know how to write a lot of code. You know what DAX should look like. You know most of, there's some things that are probably edge casey, and some things that are just a bit more harder on the other end. But you're an expert on writing stuff. And I really liked his graph down below. The risk of falling victim to AI errors is higher when you're talking about novice or beginner users who don't have a lot of experience with DAX, hasn't done a lot of tuning or optimization. The model's really large, and you don't know writing DAX this way is actually very bad performance for the model. It won't be efficient. So as you increase your knowledge of DAX, as you increase your knowledge of how the model is supposed to be shaped and what tables you build, your knowledge becomes more of that expert level. And you, I think, will find more value from potentially the Copilot, and find it can help do more remedial tasks. And things that I think that are very useful here is, why can't Copilot, I think for me, has been useful in explain this code that someone else wrote. What is it doing here? Diving into hey, there's a summarize versus summarize columns function. Which one should I use? Can you give me some explanation as the difference between those two items? Document this DAX code, write comments for each line. Those kind of things I think are very interesting because those are sometimes the remedial tasks. They're not as hard, but it supplements my work and I'm not doing a bunch of extra effort. Someone told me at the conference, they said, if you ask somebody, what is the definition of this measure or column? People will not tell you the answer, or people are too busy to sit down and say, okay, I'll help you describe or write descriptions for every column. However, if you give someone a description of a column or a measure and say, this is the answer, this is the description of this column, if it's wrong, people are more apt to jump in and say, no, that's not right. This is how we see it. So there's another layer here that is, again, taking some of these remedial tasks off my plate. Dude, I document my whole model, right? And this is something that was shown in Tyndall Editor that's going to be coming out for desktop soon. Scripting your entire model, asking the CoPilot to say, write descriptions for every single measure in this model, and boom, with one prompt, you've written 10, 15, 20, 100 different descriptions for columns, measures, and things. That's huge. And then now you can go back to your business team and say, look, I've written some description. They're probably not all right, but can you please review them and let me know if there needs to be updates? And I think that was a really aha moment for me to saying, if the task looks too daunting for people, they won't do it. But if you start them down a path, they're more than happy to give you insight or input to, that wasn't what I was expecting. And then you can adjust from there and you get closer to what the users really need. Anyways, I thought that diagram was really, really cool. I don't know if that hit you guys the same way.
I agree. And it definitely points into the areas where what are kind of where the big mistakes start to happen.
Yes. All right. With that, we're good. Final thoughts.
No, and I think that's a perfect place to end, Mike. Exactly also what Kurt kind of really talks about at the end. There's kind of two things that makes this, in terms of not the deal breaker if you were getting a 64. One of his headers is the expectations for generative AI are stupid.
I agree with that.
So, because all of this, and we're not, even though AI is really awesome and cool, every single scenario here required some knowledge, experience, and skill in prompt engineering. And yes, this is great that this is getting closer and closer, but what are we expecting it really to do over an entire model, over the over all of our code? There's a lot of investment, but this is still a skill and a human skill that we need, not just modeling your data, but asking the questions and having that context. So yeah, CoPilot, I love it. I love all of this stuff, but I love it because it is a skill. It's not just I sit back, make coffee, and I write 3 words and I'm done with my day. It's about enhancing it, and CoPilot's no different.
I think you're a good point there. I think my final thought here is there is a misconception that CoPilot is going to be this, solving everything problem. And I think Kurt does a really great job in the article outlining key areas of where you can invest your time to learn how to use CoPilot. Right now, I think for me, the areas that I see CoPilot adding value in are in the DAX core review. Writing code there is going to be helpful. I think in Fabric, writing SQL statements or helping you understand how to write some SQL statements to get your head around you're querying some tables in Lakehouse or something along those lines. I think a lot of the code-based use cases are where I find the most power around CoPilot. Things that I'm not as confident in, where I would not spend a lot of time with CoPilot, would be, to Kurt's really big struggle in the article, was getting it to give you actual answers of the data from the data model, like calculating things and then returning a result back to you. So I think those elements are a bit more, those are harder to get your head around. And so I would maybe recommend, focus your time on when you're writing code, when you're documenting your model. Those lighter weight tasks are really good opportunities for CoPilot to make things more efficient for you. I'm excited to see where it goes. It's definitely improving rapidly. There's lots of updates. They're now bringing down the costs, which is great. So now we're not consuming so much of our capacity. So I'm pleased to see where it's going. I'm just kind of keeping it at arm's length right now. I'm not doing a ton with it right at this point. Any final thoughts for you, Seth?
Yeah, I would, specifically for what we were talking about here, what Kurt has outlined is CoPilot Fabric, right? And what but I think it's applicable to all Copilots or ChatGPTs or all the LLMs in AI, right? I think it's a perfect title or focus. Mistakes are possible.
Yes.
Right. Copilot Fabric is not a catch-all term for easy button. And whatever is being marketed right now, as far as like, oh, it's all so fast and easy, I think this points out that it may work extremely well in some places and not great in others. And I think the less you know about an area and the more you're relying on Copilot, the more susceptible you are to making big mistakes or spending more time than if you would go figure something out yourself. I think where this all lands is end users need to learn more about AI capabilities and how to use them, and use them with an understanding that mistakes are possible.
Kurt, at the very end of the article, kind of asks the question, why should I use this? And he gives his opinion as well. In the future, I can see myself potentially using this for the third use case, which is use the outputs for a starting point, an ideation, a beginner design when creating reports. Sounds like a great opportunity to kind of just get your feet wet and get started and at least get the creative juices flowing to get things moving out and building things in your report. So I agree. I think Kurt makes a really good article. This is a great point. And all in all, it's definitely worth a read. It's a long read, I'll give it that, but take some time to unpack it, really get your head around this, because I think this will be, especially if we're leaders in our organizations, there's going to be hype from top down saying AI stuff is coming. We need to be doing it. And you may not want to jump on the bandwagon of, hey, look, Copilot's here in Fabric. And by the way, we should just buy it and use it. And I think you may have to tamper some expectations there. So just come in with reasonable expectations, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right, with that, thank you all very much for listening to the podcast. We really appreciate your ears. We know this is a long hour of hard working out or biking or running or whatever you're doing. So we hope you had a successful exercise today. For those of you who are doing that, for all of us others who are just sitting here on keyboards and pushing off work for another hour, we also appreciate your ears as well. Thank you very much. Our only ask is if you like this episode, if you like what we're talking about here, please share with somebody else. That's the only way we grow the podcast. Let other people know that you liked and enjoyed the content here. Tommy, where else can you find the content?
You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us a ton. Do you have a question, idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbi.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central, and join the conversation on all powerbi.tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you all very much, and we'll see you next time.